What's going on, Babylonians? It's me, Songs of Rage, and I'm back again today to be able to bring another build guide when it comes to the rogue class inside of Diablo 4's beta. So this build is going to be all about being able to manage all those hordes when it comes to a bunch of enemies in front of you. So rather than being a boss killer, it's going to be absolutely excelling when it comes to doing dungeons and being able to wipe the floor with every single minion that comes across your way. Now, while it does specialize mostly in minion removal, it definitely can be a boss killer as well. It just takes a little bit longer times compared to some of the other builds that are purely dedicated to being able to take down bosses. But clearly I'm talking too much. You're not interested in hearing me babble on about this. You're more interested in being able to find out what the build actually has in stock for us and entails. So make sure to drop a like and subscribe if you did find this build guide very useful. We'll be covering Diablo 4 a lot more when it comes to being able to on full release or when it comes to the next beta weekend. And feel free to hit us up over on our Discord to be able to get in touch with more build ideas to be able to help each other out when it comes to the community. But with all that said and done, let's get right into the video. Alright, so let's have a look into the skill tree. Now we are going to be using all 26 points that we can find in the beta. So obviously you want to be able to get yourself to level 25 and then grab the other 2 points that you can get from increasing your reputation while playing the beta. So first and foremost, we need to be able to have a look into all the skills to be able to find out how we're able to boost our damage as much as possible. So we're going to start off with our basic skills, and our best one that we're going to be able to choose for this one is going to be Puncture. Throwing blades a short distance, dealing a certain amount of damage, and every third cast slows enemies by 20% for 2 seconds, or a critical strikes will always slow. Slow is a great way to be able to deal some crowd control, and it's also going to feed into some really nice modifiers when we're going to be looking into this. So we will be picking up Enhanced Puncture, where we gain 2 energy when Puncture damages a crowd control enemy. So if we are landing that critical shot and we're able to, with the third cast, be able to slow enemies, we will then be starting generating some enemy, and we've got some other great ways to be able to do some more crowd control. On top of that, we also are getting Fundamental Puncture to be able to now throw out 3 blades instead. Now, these will reduce it down to 35% of its base damage for each of these ones, so technically it is a boost if you are able to land all 3, but it's a really great way to be able to spread that slow in of itself, and then hitting an enemy with at least 2 blades will once will make them vulnerable for 2 seconds, and that allows us to be able to get even more damage potential out of it. So overall, I do think that Puncture is a great skill, but you don't need more than 1 point into it, so you just need to be able to grab a couple and then start making your way down to the other skills. Moving on, we're able to grab our main damage dealer, and this is going to be Penetrating Shot, where we fire an arrow that pierces through all enemies in a line, dealing, and this is going to be stacked up a little bit because of how my current enchantments I have on my gear, but it is around about 649 to 794 damage. Now, because we are using combo points as well, we are able to increase that damage from being able to land our punctures, so if you are able to stack it up to be able to get to 3 points, then this will increase it from 649 to 794 to 1234 to 1508 damage, and this is going to happen on every single one of the arrows that we fire out. On top of that, we are also then grabbing one modifier, which is Enhanced Penetrating Shot, where it deals 20% damage for every single enemy that it pierces. So because it can travel through pretty much a whole horde, we are able to stack up our damage. So if there is a boss at the end and we fire it through, like, say 3, 4, 5 enemies to be able to get there, by the time it gets to that boss, we are now landing a massive hit in of itself, especially if we do have those 3 points when we use our combo points as well. So moving on from there, we now have our agility skills, and when it comes to agility, we are picking up 1 skill, and we are also picking up my favourite, which is Weapon Mastery, and we are putting 3 points in there because we are using crossbows to be able to deal 15% increased critical strike damage. Now, you can also opt to use a bow, and bows would be a little bit more optimal when it comes to being able to apply vulnerable a little bit more often, and we will be able to reliably apply vulnerable to most of the enemies that we will be encountering. So feel free to be able to mess about with bows, feel free to mess about with crossbows, and then just take your pick as to which one you want. But crossbows do more base damage, and they do fire a little bit slower because of it, but that base damage is amplified through the rest of the build, so I do prefer crossbows when it comes to the 2. Now, in terms of the skills that we are picking up, we are grabbing Caltrops. Now, Caltrops has 2 charges on it, has a fairly low cooldown, and what it will do is it will leap your character backwards from where you're currently aiming, throwing Caltrops on the ground, dealing a certain amount of damage, and then slowing them by 50%, making them stay in that circle. This lasts for about 6 seconds on the floor, and then we are also grabbing modifiers to be able to increase the amount of damage that enemies will take every single second they are inside of Caltrops. So in this case, they will take 3% for every single second they stay within that Caltrop circle. And then on top of that, we also have Methodical, where we now deal cold damage and chill enemies for 20% per second. This is extremely important when we get a little bit further down in terms of our imbuement, and this allows us to be able to stack some even more damage multipliers to be able to increase the amount of damage we do every single time we cast our Penetrating Shot. So next up we have our subterfuge skills, and I'm currently going with smoke grenade. Now I am kind of messing about with the idea of being able to pick up other skills, but I feel like smoke grenade is a really nice damage multiplier when we can put a point into here and then grab enhanced smoke grenade to be able to deal 15% more damage to enemies that get hit by the smoke grenade. Considering we can chuck that into the middle of a group and then we can fire our penetrating shot straight through it to be able to do 15% damage to all of them, and then obviously on top of that extra damage when it pierces through enemies, I do think that smoke grenade is a great way to be able to keep enemies in place. Smoke Grenade's also a great way to be able to keep enemies inside of caltrops because it will daze them, so the longer they stay inside that circle, the more damage they will take, and that is especially helpful when it comes to bosses. And we are also grabbing 3 points into Exploits, where we can deal 18% more damage to healthy and injured enemies, and healthy is when an enemy is above 80%, and injured is when they are less than 35%, so it helps with being able to start off a fight, and it also helps to be able to finish that fight at the same time. So I do think that's a great way. I would like a few extra points, because if we were able to level up a little bit further in terms of this beta, I would be grabbing Malice, but unfortunately at this moment in time, in terms of my perk placements, in terms of like the skills and everything like that, it's the only way, it kind of misses out on that, but I do think that this is the best kind of placement for that. We will be picking up Poison Trap, but we do get that as base standard when it comes to our gear, so we don't need to worry too much about putting a point into that. So I definitely would recommend trying to find a point in your gear slots for being able to use Subterfuge, so you do have access to Poison Trap as an additional way to be able to inflict damage. And then lastly, in terms of skill tree, because we haven't gone into the ultimate tree at all, because we don't have enough points, but I would recommend grabbing Shadow Clone to be able to try and mess about with that, and maybe toying with the idea of Death Trap, but once again, we don't have the points, and it's more important to be able to grab all this. So we do go for Shadow Imbuement, to be able to imbue our weapons with Festering Shadows, where our next two casts of a skill, where that's imbuable, which the only other one that actually does get imbued is going to be our Penetrating Shot. So every single time we cast that skill, or at least for the 2 times while it's on cooldown, we apply shadow damage, and then we infect enemies for 6 seconds, where infected enemies explode on death, dealing 228 damage to all surrounding enemies. And if we don't actually kill them in the time period for that, then they will just detonate themselves for 228. This is where the majority of our crowd control is going to come into play, because when we kill that enemy, we'll be dealing so much more damage, and because we are trying to hoard them all up together, they will always be in range of each other when it comes to being able to detonate. Now, Shadow Imbuement is only good for horde clearing. It's not very good for boss clearing. So if you feel like you're fine in terms of being able to do away with hordes, or if you are going straight into a boss fight, I would probably recommend going into Cold Imbuement, because Cold Imbuement is probably the best when it comes to being able to take down bosses, and it just works so well with some of the other multipliers that we're going to be having a look at. We also have 1 point into Shadow Crash, being able to Shadow Damage has a 10% chance to be able to stun for 0.5 seconds. It's a nice little bit of extra crowd control, but once again, it's not very often we don't see this really proc, but the real reason why we've gone into this is to be able to grab Consuming Shadows, where every single time we kill an enemy with Shadow Damage, we generate 10 energy, and this is going to be one of the main ways we're able to refresh our energy to be able to consistently keep casting our Penetrating Shot. So the kind of overall gameplay loop of when it comes to this is being able to activate Shadow Imbuement, firing your arrow into a group of enemies, and because you've then killed them, you've detonated them, you're able to then get all your energy back, and then you're ready to go again when it comes to your Penetrating Shot. So for our last 3 points, we have put it straight into Frigid Finesse, because we're able to deal 15% increased damage to chilled enemies, and this bonus increases to 30% against frozen enemies. The reason why is because we have gone for our Caltrops skill to be able to deal cold damage and chill enemies for 20% per second, and if they, by any chance they do stay in it long enough, they will eventually get frozen, which means that you're able to deal even more damage to them. Just instantly casting a Caltrops and firing at the enemies that are inside that circle will be giving you a 15% increased damage multiplier right there and then, and then obviously you can combine this with your smoke grenade to also keep them inside the Caltrops, so they do get the chance of being able to be frozen, but on top of that you've also got your 15% damage multiplier from your enhanced smoke grenade, so these all work in tandem to be able to boost up a certain area of a map to be able to then start in dealing some initial damage, and once you're able to fire all the way through them, you'll increase your damage through Penetrating Shot, your Shadow Imbuement will start proccing, being able to detonate all the enemies that were low level and managed to get killed by that ability, and then you'll get all your energy back so that you're ready to be able to restart that loop all over again. So when it comes to our specializations, we are going for combo points. The reason why we go for combo points is because we are looking to be able to increase the amount of damage that we will be doing with our Penetrating Shot, and it's a massive bonus compared to some of the other skills. It's almost double, just purely from being able to land getting 3 points from casting our Puncture. Now, the reason why we haven't gone for Inner Sight is because using Shadow Imbuement and some of the perks that we picked up on our skill tree, we're pretty much always able to keep really high levels of energy in the first place, so we don't need to be able to grab unlimited energy for 4 seconds when we can pretty much do that as long as we're doing things well ourselves, so why would we ever need to be able to do that? Now, in terms of enchantments, there are some really cool ones to be able to use, and definitely some of them are key to be able to actually use in this class. So, for example, when it comes to using one of our imprints, we need penetrating shot damaging an enemy, 2 additional arrows split off to either side. These side arrows deal 76% of the penetrating shot's base damage and do not split. Now, the reason why I've got 76 is because if you do put it on a two-handed weapon, so in the case of the crossbow, it doubles the bonus. Usually it's around about 37, 38, or anywhere between 30 and 40%. So if you do put it on a two-handed weapon, you get double the bonus, and in this case, when putting it on my crossbow, it allows me to be able to get 76%. I am looking out for that god roll to be able to get 80, but obviously that 4% isn't a big deal. It's still more than serviceable in this build. On top of that, we also have things like 20% increased crowd control duration and deal 50% increased damage to unstoppable enemies. I do think that's probably one of the better ones to be able to go grab. It's definitely great to be able to take on some elites because they do become unstoppable in that sense, so having that damage boost really helps out with the build. And then on top of that, we also have being able to chilled enemies being hit by your grenade skills have a chance equal to double your critical strike chance to be instantly frozen for 2 seconds, and you deal 80% increased critical strike damage against frozen enemies. Now, the reason why this one's so good is because we are going to be chucking so many grenades out with the help of our abilities and with the help of our evade. So we're going to be leaving behind stun grenades, we're going to be casting our smoke grenade, we're going to be using caltrops, which we'll talk about here. Being able to throw out a cluster of exploding stun grenades that deal a certain amount of damage and then stun the enemies. So all of these skills have a chance to be able to freeze enemies inside of caltrops, and being able to do that means that we're going to be boosting our damage even higher when we factor in our skill tree, because instead of it being a 15% damage to chilled enemies, we're now doing 30%. So it's massively important to be able to grab something like this to be able to have that chance to be able to increase the amount of damage we will be putting out. Alongside that, we also have dealing direct damage to enemies affected by your trap skills, which in this case we do have our poison trap. It allows us to be able to have a small amount of chance to be able to make enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds, and it's also really important to be able to get attacking enemies with a basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill cast by 10% up to 50%. I definitely would recommend looking out for one of these, because what you can do is use your puncture. Not only does this grab your combo points, not only does it also have the ability to be able to make enemies vulnerable, because you will, or slow in this case, when you're throwing out your blades, but it also, by the time you've cast anywhere between up to 5 points, you'll then be dealing even more damage with your penetration shot, so you'll be increasing that 3-point damage by 50% on top of that, allowing us to be able to get up to some daft numbers in of itself. Now, in terms of stats that you want to be able to look out for when it comes to your gear, you're definitely going to want to be able to get some nice damage multipliers, and the best ones to really kind of aim for are going to be something like vulnerable damage or damage to crowd control enemies, since that's going to be the main bread and butter when it comes to this build. Now, you can also get some shadow damage, and there's also some all damage, if I remember right here, as you can see there. So definitely be able to mix and match it with your type to be able to maximize the amount of damage that you can output. But in terms of purely maximizing the amount of damage that you will be able to do, vulnerable is going to be a great shout to be able to go, and also crowd control, because of the sheer amount of abilities that you're going to be putting down to be able to get all those crowd controlled enemies out there. Now, if you can't find any of those, then you can still make use of things like critical strike damage, because you will be doing a lot of critical strikes, and you can definitely aim for something like core skill damage to be able to increase the amount of damage that your penetrating shot will be doing. Overall, I absolutely love the stun and gun when it comes to going into most of the content inside of Diablo, whether it be story-based or whether it be going into things like dungeons, and especially some kind of endgame kind of content. I can see it doing really well there. But when it comes to something like maybe a world boss, I probably would steer clear of this, just purely based on the fact that when it comes to crowd control, we've noticed that it doesn't seem to do too much when it comes to being able to like try and stun or try to keep enemies inside things like your caltrops. Now, you can still get some work done, and you can technically shift yourself across to being more of like a support-based character in offering those damage increases, but that's about it, and you will still have some decent damage output, but it's not going to be as much as some of the other builds that do exist inside of Diablo 4. But there we have it. That is everything to do on the stun and gun builds. Let me know in the comment section down below. Is this something that you're willing to be able to give a go? How do you find the shadow damage when it comes to imbuement in this game? And also, are you a melee or a bow type kind of player when it comes to playing the rogue class? Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. Massive thank you to the Babylonian family, as always, for their continued support. Their names appear at the end of every single one of our videos, and it's just our way of being able to show our thanks for that. Make sure to drop a like and a subscribe, it really does help the channel out. Make sure to hit us up over on our Discord, our link can be found in the video description, so we can talk about other builds going forward and be able to get a nice community going where everyone helps each other out. But with all that said and done, keep yourselves safe, keep yourselves well, and I'll see you all on our next video.